In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to use Cinema 4D's Attribute Manager. So the Attribute Manager is a key window inside of Cinema 4D, and it's one that you're going to start to work with and access very frequently, and this factors into almost anything that you do inside of Cinema 4D, whether it's modeling related, animation related, or any other number of things that you can do inside of Cinema 4D. So let's take a look at what we have. So let's drop in maybe just a simple object here. Let's go with a primitive pyramid here. Now the Attribute Manager is found over here on the right hand side of your interface down toward the bottom. That's going to be this window right here. If you look in here, we should see this little Attributes tab active. That means that we are currently inside of the Attribute Manager. So the Attribute Manager pretty much shows you all of the attributes that are controlling whatever it is that you have selected. So right now we have something like this primitive pyramid selected. So in here we can start to control things like the size, X, Y, and Z. We can start to control the number of segments that we have here, which really we can't see at this point, but if we turn on something like the grow shading with lines, we can start to come in here and see how we can start to dial up the number of segments, and we can change the orientation of this object as well. Now this applies for anything that we have selected. So if I go over and grab this torus, you can see now we're looking at the attributes for this torus, where now we can start to control the ring radius, the number of segments that we have in our ring, and so on and so forth. Now again, this is something that applies to almost anything inside of Cinema 4D. It even applies to tools. So if I come up and select my Move tool, now we can start to see some of the attributes that are connected to this Move tool, and so on and so forth. So this again is something that is going to factor into almost everything that you do in Cinema 4D. So getting comfortable with this Attribute Manager is going to be really important. So in addition to being able to come in and simply work with whatever object it is that you have selected, we also have these different tabs. So depending on what you have selected, there can sometimes be several tabs worth of information as far as whether or not this object is going to be visible in the editor. So we could say maybe this object is not visible. Alright, we can set that back to on. We could tell Cinema 4D whether or not this is going to be visible in the renderer, whether or not we want this to use a certain color. Let's say we turn this on, and now we want to override this color to something that is maybe a little bit easier for us to see. We have full control over that inside of this Attribute Manager. Now we can also actually display the information across multiple tabs. So let's say I want to see the information from this basic tab and the information from this object tab, but I really don't necessarily like going back and forth between them like this. Well, if I select one and then shift select the other one, you can see now I can see the information from both of these tabs displayed at the same time. Now this Attribute Manager, as we've seen, will actually change depending on what we have selected. And in this case, because both the torus and this pyramid both have the same basic and object tab, you can see that Cinema 4D is smart enough to remember that the basic and the object tab was selected, and it keeps that selection whenever I select my next object. So sort of an interesting little workflow that we have here. Another sort of neat thing that we have is the fact that this Attribute Manager can remember what was selected, and it can remember the order. So we have within the Attribute Manager these little back and forth buttons. You can sort of think of these like the back and forth buttons on your web browser. So if I have multiple objects here, and maybe getting back to a certain object is going to be really difficult or might require several clicks, what I can do is just go back through my history until I get to the point at which I had the proper object selected. I can also start to step up in my hierarchy if that is something that I need to do. And you'll learn a little bit more about hierarchy and just what that means in one of our later lessons. But for now, this is a really neat feature that we have full back and forth capability. We also have the ability to lock the attribute manager. So if we lock this down, you can see now whenever I select this pyramid that it still stays locked to my torus object. So regardless of what I have selected, it is now locked down, which can sometimes be useful. Maybe if I want to keep a certain set of attributes on this attribute manager at all times, but maybe still have the freedom to come in here and work with another object in my scene, I do have that freedom. Now, another thing that we could do is actually have multiple attribute managers open at the same time. So if I have, let's say, this pyramid selected, I can come in, and if I click on this little icon right here, what that will do is open up a new attribute manager in a separate window. Now this attribute manager, you can see, has all the exact same functionality. Whenever I open up a new attribute manager, you can see it's automatically locked to whatever I currently have selected. In this case, it's going to be this pyramid. So now I have an attribute manager for my pyramid. I can go back to my torus and continue working on that. So sometimes, maybe if you want to have very similar attributes, or if you have attributes from one object that you want to be able to see as you're typing in something else, this does become really, really useful. So as I said, you'll start to really get familiar with this attribute manager as we start to get into some later lessons. This has to do with modeling, it has to do with objects, it has to do with scene properties. Your attribute manager will start to come into play whenever you start working with materials and textures. So it's a very integral part of the Cinema 4D workflow. So now that we have sort of an idea of how this attribute manager works, in our next lesson, we'll move up and start to take a look at the object manager.